Hi everyone, welcome back to the Etymon Project. Today I'm going to be going over a new series that I'm starting where I'm going to be walking through the translations of a bunch of new Aeneid passages that are going to be on the 2026 AP Latin exam. Disclaimer, I'm not a Latin teacher or anything, I'm just a student, but I did take the AP Latin exam 2 years ago and I did pretty well, so hopefully this can give you a little bit of help if you're stuck on these lines or something. I'm gonna be going pretty fast through the translation and kind of just showing my thought process while doing it. So hopefully that can give you just some tips and maybe a better understanding of these passages. So today we're going to be going over book 7, lines 45 through 59. And these are about King Latinus, who is kind of the king of the ancient Italian area. And he's the father of Lavinia, who Aeneas eventually marries. So he's kind of the uniting factor between the Trojans and the Italians. But yeah, let's just get started. So we can start by looking for the nominative subjects and then the verb. That's kind of the best place to start whenever you're translating a new sentence. So I see we have Rex, Latinus, and Senior, which are all nominative, so probably are going to be subject of the sentence. So the old King Latinus, and in fact we have Yam, so it's the already old king, or the now old King Latinus. And then we can look for the verb, which is going to be at the end of the sentence. So regebot, here's the verb, which means he was ruling. And then if we want to figure out what he was ruling, we could look in the middle for the accusative phrases. And as you can see here, we have a lot. We have arwa, et urbes, placidas. So these are all going to be the things that he was ruling. So he was ruling the peaceful fields and cities. And then the last three words, longa in pace, that's an ablative preposition phrase, so in a long piece, or for a long piece. Okay, we have that in. Now let's move to the next kind of clause or phrase we have here. So we can start by looking at the verb, since we don't have a explicit subject for the sentence. So accipimus is we accept or we hear, and then we can look for the accusative object we have, which is here hunc, and then genitum goes with that because it's also accusative. So we accept him, and then genitum is born, so we accept him born. And then we have a bunch of ablative nouns that are who he was born from, I'm assuming. And the hunc here is referring to Latinus because that's the last person who was mentioned. So it sounds like he was born from Faunus and a Laurentine nymph Marica. We can write that in. Okay, now let's move to the next kind of phrase. So here we have a subject sort of phrase. We have Picus pater, and so that kind of sounds like the father, and then his name is Picus. And then Fauno, maybe it's dative. It's the father to Faunus, so we can write that in. And then we have the next phrase, which is starts with a subject isque, so he, and I'm assuming that's Picus because that was the last nominative word. And then refert is the verb, so let's write in all of this. Refer is just he says or he reports, and then the accusative is parentem te, so you, the parent, or you as his parent, so we can write that in. And I think we need more space here, so I'm going to start moving things over and writing longer lines. But and then if we want to know who he says as his parent, we look to the next word, which is Saturne, so Saturn. And then we have this nominative phrase here that's describing Saturn. You, the auctor, or creator, founder, the ultimus auctor, it usually means last, but here it's the very farthest away, so the first creator of the bloodline, because it kind of makes sense if you think about it going all the way back. He's the farthest away. So okay, so in this next sentence here, we're going to have a nominative word at the start, filius, which is part of the subject, and then we have a couple other nominative words proles, que, virilis, and nulla, so those are all going to go together. And then the verb here is fuit, and then nulla fuit is there was none. So this whole thing means there was no son and male offspring to him. And then huic means to him. So, and then fato divum is an ablative by the fate. And then divum is a weird genitive construction of the gods. So he didn't have a son by the fate of the gods is essentially what it means. Okay, I made everything a little smaller so it could fit. Hopefully you can still kind of read it. I'll make it more space next time. But yeah, so let's move on to the next sentence, or next phrase, which is starts with prima. So I'm assuming it's kind of a adjective, but it's sort of modifying proles, which is continued from the last sentence. So or last phrase, so the first offspring. Oriens means like rising. It's like the active participle, so while rising. And then Uenta is like young, so while still young. And then Erepta est goes together, so it's like has been taken, or has been like snatched away, so we can write that in. Okay, now let's move on to the next sentence. We can look for a subject first, which I see is philia is probably a subject. Matura probably modifies philia. So that's going to be our subject. And then verb is serwabat. So she was like serving or taking care of is kind of what that means. Oh, sola is another word that modifies philia. So the daughter alone was like taking care of. And then the accusative words are domum et tantas sedes. So like the house and so great. They're like kingdom, I guess. And also she was yam matura viro, so like now mature for a man or like a husband. So let's write that in. This last little clause here, yam plenus nubilis annus, is basically just now like ready. Like technically it's like full, like she has enough years of marriage. Okay, the next sentence, we start with multi, which is probably going to be a nominative subject, so we can highlight that. And then petebant is likely the verb here, so many were seeking. Her, ilam, as the object. And then a bunch of ablative phrases like from Great Latium, and then all of Ausonia, so we can write that in. Okay, next sentence starts with the verb, so petit, and then we want to see who is seeking. So Turnus is like the last word in the phrase, but the subject, because it's like nominative. Pulcherimus is probably describing him. So like the most beautiful Turnus seeks. Ante alios is kind of like before everyone else. And then omnis, I guess, goes with Pulcherimus, so he's like the most beautiful of them all, so we can write that in. And then this next phrase is kind of like describing Turnus again with potens, so powerful. And then awis and atawis is like in grandparents and like great-great-great-grandparents, so he is powerful ancestry. I'm just gonna write that for space. Okay, and then as we come to the last kind of part, we see quem, which is probably referring to Turnus, and then regia coniunx, which is probably the subject, so like the queenly wife. And then we go to the verb, properabat was like hastening or speeding. Adjungi is the kind of complementary infinitive there, to be joined. And then we go back to the accusative object we had before, quem, so she was hastening to be joined to him. And then generum is like son-in-law, and miro amore is just like with wonderful love. So, and then with the last phrase we can start with portenta, which seems to be like the only like possible word for a subject, so portenta. And then obstant is the verb, so these omens were preventing. And then varis terroribus probably goes together. And then deum is probably a abbreviated genitive phrase for the gods, so it's kind of like, but the omens of the gods were preventing this with various terrors. So I'll write that in. Okay, so there's the translation. Hopefully that was helpful. I'll definitely try to make it a little bit bigger next time so I can fit the lines and don't have to write too small. But yeah, I'm going to be going through a lot of book 7 and then a lot of other just Aeneid passages that are new this year, because I don't think there's that many resources for them yet. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.